The room was eerily silent, the only sound being the faint flickering of candle flames, casting long shadows against the damp stone walls. The researcher sat stiffly at the table, his fingers lightly tapping against the surface, though his mind was focused on the unseen presence before him. The ritual had been performed exactly as the ancient text described, and now something was here. A deep, layered voice resonated through the room, neither near nor far, neither loud nor soft. It felt as though it came from the very air itself. "Jinn, you have called upon me. Speak." The researcher inhaled sharply, adjusting his posture to hide his nervousness. His notebook lay open in front of him, each question carefully prepared, yet no amount of preparation could have steadied his pulse at this moment. "Researcher, who are you? Where do Jinn come from?" There was a pause, a suffocating silence, before the voice returned, slow and deliberate. "Jinn, we are the unseen, the watchers, the ones who existed before your kind took its first breath. We are born of smokeless fire, shaped in the unseen world long before you knew light from darkness." The researcher's grip on his pen tightened. "Researcher, do you exist in our world?" A sound followed, something close to laughter, though hollow and unsettling. "Jinn, we walk among you. We are in the spaces you ignore, the corners of your sight, the whispers you dismiss. You do not see us, but we see you." The researcher swallowed. "Researcher, have you interacted with humans before?" The candles flickered violently, as if disturbed by an invisible force. "Jinn, more than you will ever know." The dim candlelight cast flickering shadows along the stone walls, the atmosphere thick with an unspoken tension. The researcher could feel the weight of the presence before him, unseen but undeniably there. The air had grown colder since the conversation began, a sensation that sent a slow chill creeping down his spine. He steadied himself, his pen hovering over the notebook, heart pounding as he prepared for the next question. "The researcher, can Jinn see us the way we see them?" A deep silence followed, stretching unnaturally long. Then the voice returned, smooth and deliberate, echoing from every corner of the room. "Jinn, you see with weak eyes, limited by flesh. We see beyond sight, beyond light, beyond what you can comprehend. You look ahead, but we see all that surrounds you." The researcher exhaled, pressing further. "Researcher, are you watching us all the time?" A faint shift in the air, the flicker of candle flames reacting to something unseen. Some of us watch, some of us walk among you, some pass unnoticed. You believe yourselves alone in an empty room. But how can you be sure?" The researcher's pulse quickened. He had expected unsettling answers, but hearing them spoken aloud was something else entirely. "Researcher, do humans ever notice when they are being watched by a Jinn?" There was a pause before the answer came, almost amused. "Jinn." A chill down your spine, a shadow where none should be, the feeling of eyes when you are alone. You sense us, but you do not understand. The candlelight dimmed for a brief moment, and the researcher gripped his pen tighter, realizing that, perhaps, in this very moment, he was being observed in ways he could never perceive. The candlelight wavered, casting erratic shadows against the cold stone walls. The researcher could feel the weight of the Jinn's presence pressing down on him, an unseen force lingering in the air, thick and suffocating. He steadied his breath, forcing himself to maintain control as he turned his gaze toward the notebook in front of him. His fingers twitched slightly, gripping the pen with more force than necessary. "Researcher, do Jinn influence human thoughts?" A silence followed, longer than before, carrying with it an undeniable sense of amusement. When the voice finally spoke, it was calm, but laced with something deeper, something unreadable. Jinn, more than you realize, more than you would ever be comfortable knowing. The researcher's pulse quickened, though he refused to show hesitation. He pressed forward. Researcher, how do you influence us? The air in the room grew heavier, the candlelight dimming slightly, as if something unseen had moved closer. Jinn. A whisper in a moment of doubt. A thought that does not belong to you, but you claim as your own. A shift in desire, a change in impulse, an unexplained urge. Tell me, human, how often have you made a decision and wondered why? The researcher swallowed hard. Researcher, so not all of our thoughts are ours? A sound followed, low and almost like laughter, but stretched and hollow. Jinn, few of them are. Some come from you, some do not. The question is, do you know the difference? A flicker of movement in the shadows made the researcher's breath hitch, as though something had stirred just beyond his line of sight. The air in the room thickened, pressing against the researcher's skin like an unseen force. The flickering candlelight cast elongated shadows across the stone walls, creating shapes that seemed to shift and move on their own. He tightened his grip on the pen, his pulse steady, but his mind filled with unease. He knew this question was dangerous, yet it had to be asked. Researcher, can Jinn possess humans? For a moment there was nothing but silence, a stillness so profound it felt as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. Then the voice returned, lower this time, almost amused. Jinn, you ask as if you do not already know the answer. The researcher swallowed, trying to push past the growing unease. Researcher, I want to hear it from you. A faint hum filled the space, something between thought and laughter. What? Jinn. Possession. A word your kind fears. A concept you barely understand. Yes, we can take hold of the weak, the lost, those whose minds have cracks we can slip into. But not all possession is what you think. The researcher's fingers twitched slightly over the notebook. Researcher, what do you mean? A shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. Jinn. Not all possession is forceful. Not all of us seek control of the body. Some of us whisper, plant ideas, make you believe the choices are your own. And some do not take the body, but the soul. The candlelight flickered violently, and for the briefest moment, the researcher thought he saw a shadow move where there should have been none. The researcher could feel the tension thickening in the air, pressing down like an unseen weight. The candlelight flickered, stretching the shadows unnaturally against the damp stone walls. He hesitated for a brief moment, before looking down at his notebook, his fingers gripping the pen tighter than before. He knew that this question would take him deeper into the unknown, but the curiosity burning within him was stronger than his fear. Researcher, do Jinn have their own society? A deep silence followed, one that felt intentional. The unseen presence seemed to shift slightly, its energy growing denser. Then, the voice returned, smooth and slow. Jinn, did you believe your kind was the only one with structure? That only humans build, rule, and destroy? We are older than you. Do you not think we have our own world, our own laws, our own kind? The researcher inhaled slowly, absorbing the words. Researcher? Then you have civilizations, cities, leaders? A sound followed, something between a chuckle and a sigh. Jinn. The researcher's pulse quickened at the implications. Researcher, are there conflicts among your kind? A pause, heavier than before. Jinn, There are those among us who seek power, just as your kind does. There are those who follow, and those who rebel. Some wage wars in ways you will never understand, and some walk freely between your world and ours, unnoticed, watching. The candlelight dimmed for a fraction of a second, and the researcher could not shake the feeling that something unseen had just passed through the room. The candlelight flickered violently for a moment before settling into a soft, unsteady glow. The researcher shifted in his chair, feeling the weight of the unseen presence pressing against his very being. His pulse quickened, and he exhaled slowly, steadying his breath. He had read stories, heard whispered accounts of this question, but he had never dared to ask it directly. Until now. Researcher, can Jinn fall in love with humans? A pause followed, longer than any before. The silence was suffocating, as if something unseen was considering its response carefully. When the voice finally spoke, it was lower, carrying an unsettling undertone. Jinn. Love. A fragile thing. A human thing. You believe it to be innocent. But love is possession. Love is desire. Love is control. So tell me, human, do you truly understand what you are asking? The researcher swallowed, pressing forward despite the unease clawing at his chest. Researcher, have Jinn ever loved humans? A soft, almost amused exhale, yet it carried something else. A weight. A memory. The researcher felt a chill crawl along his spine. Researcher, what happens when a Jinn falls in love with a human? The air in the room shifted, the temperature dropping slightly. In Jinn, love is not always kind. It is not always gentle. Some Jinn love, but their love turns to obsession. A Jinn who desires does not easily let go. And when a human chooses another, when they try to walk away, they do not always succeed. The flame of one of the candles flickered erratically, as if something unseen had brushed past it. The researcher could feel an invisible presence lingering, its attention unwavering. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, the air thick with something unseen. The researcher could feel a shift, an unspoken warning in the way the candle flames wavered. His fingers tensed around the pen, and for a brief moment he considered whether this question should remain unasked. But the curiosity within him burned too deeply. Researcher, what happens when someone makes a deal with a Jinn? A long silence followed, stretching unnaturally, as if the presence in the room was deciding whether to answer. Then the voice returned, quieter this time, deliberate. Jinn, a deal, an exchange. Your kind believes they understand bargains, yet you never consider the cost. The researcher leaned slightly forward, his heartbeat audible in his ears. Researcher, do all Jinn make deals? A faint shift in the air, something unseen moving just beyond the edges of perception. Jinn, not all. Some find amusement in it, some seek power, and some simply wait for those foolish enough to ask. The researcher hesitated, then forced himself to ask the next question. Researcher, what do Jinn usually ask for in return? The voice let out something like a sigh, though it carried an undercurrent of something darker. Jinn, that depends on the one who asks. Some pay with time, some with service, some with their very essence. Some think they escape the cost, that they are clever enough to outwit what they do not understand. They are always wrong. The candlelight dimmed for a brief moment, and the researcher felt an overwhelming sense that something unseen was watching him closely now, more intently than before. The flickering candlelight cast long, stretching shadows along the stone walls, but the researcher barely noticed. His grip on the pen had tightened, and his breath felt heavier than before. He had studied ancient texts, read accounts of those who had spoken of this question in hushed whispers, but none had ever given a clear answer. He hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "Researcher, what do Jinn know about the afterlife?" A deep, unsettling silence followed. It was not hesitation. It was something else, something heavier. When the voice finally came, it was lower, almost distant, as if recalling something that should not be spoken aloud. "Jinn, there are things you were never meant to know." The researcher's breath hitched, but he pressed forward. "Researcher, you have existed longer than us. Surely you have seen what happens after death." The flames of the candles flickered violently, as if disturbed by an unseen force. When the voice returned, it carried an edge, a warning laced within its tone. "Jinn, we have seen souls depart. We have followed them as they slip between what is and what is not. But you ask a dangerous question, human. Some doors, once opened, do not close." The researcher swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Researcher, do humans go to a specific place after death?" A soft exhale, something like a sigh, but layered with something else. Something unreadable. Like, Jinn! Some are taken, some are left wandering, some never leave at all, and some do not go where they expected. A cold sensation spread through the air, as if something unseen had entered the space. The researcher could feel it now. A presence watching, listening, waiting. The air in the room had grown impossibly still. The candle flames which had flickered with each breath of the conversation now stood frozen, unnaturally rigid, as if something unseen had settled within the space. The researcher's fingers felt cold against the notebook, but he ignored the discomfort. This was the question that had haunted him the most. He inhaled slowly, steadying his voice before speaking. "Researcher, what is the greatest secret humans have forgotten?" The silence that followed was unlike the others. It was not just a pause. It was a presence, something shifting in the unseen corners of the chamber. When the voice finally returned, it was softer, but heavier, as if the words carried a weight beyond comprehension. "Jinn, you believe your history is yours, that you have written it, shaped it, preserved it. But history is a fragile thing, easily altered, easily erased." The researcher's pulse quickened. "Researcher, erased by who?" A sound followed. Not laughter, not breath, but something between the two, something unsettling. "You. By those who do not wish for you to remember. By those who walk unseen among you. By those who decide what knowledge may survive and what must be forgotten." The researcher tightened his grip on his pen. "Researcher, what have we forgotten?" The voice grew quieter, as if speaking something forbidden. "Your past is not what you think it is. You were not the first to rule this world. You were not the first to walk upon it. You were not even the first to fall." A shiver ran down the researcher's spine. He felt for the first time that this answer was not just information. It was a warning. The air in the chamber had grown unbearably heavy, thick with something unseen yet undeniably present. The candlelight flickered weakly now, their flames struggling against an invisible force. The researcher could feel it, an unshakable sense that he was being studied, measured. The answers he had received had changed something, though he could not yet understand what. His fingers felt stiff as he turned the page in his notebook, glancing at the final question. His throat felt dry, but he forced himself to speak. "Researcher, why did you answer my questions?" A silence followed, but this time, it was different. It was not hesitation, nor contemplation. It was something else, something deeper. When the voice finally returned, it was lower than before, quieter, yet somehow closer. Jinn, you assume you have control in this exchange, that you ask and I simply answer. But tell me, human, do you believe you summoned me, or that I allowed myself to be summoned? The researcher felt his heartbeat against his ribs, steady but loud. Researcher, you came because I called you. A soft, drawn-out exhale. The researcher's fingers twitched slightly. The researcher, then why are you answering me? The voice shifted, its tone carrying something unreadable now, something that made the air colder. The walls seemed closer. Because you ask, because you wanted to know, because knowledge is never given freely, it is taken, and now you must wonder, was it I who answered, or was it you who was meant to hear? The candle flames twisted unnaturally, and the researcher, for the first time since the ritual began, felt the undeniable weight of regret.